This is All India Radio. In the program Spotlight, now we bring you discussion on Indo-Pacific Regional Dialogue 2022, India's commitment for free, open and inclusive Indo-Pacific region. The participants are Anil Kumar Trigunyat, former ambassador, and Nilova Roy Chaudhary, journalist.
With China's increasing assertiveness on maritime issues, India has reiterated its stand on a free, open and inclusive Indo-Pacific order in accordance with international law. Speaking at the 9th ASEAN Defence Ministers meeting in Cambodia on Wednesday, Defence Minister Rajnath Singh affirmed India's position, stating that India advocates a free, open and inclusive Indo-Pacific region and calls for peaceful dialogue and resolution of disputes while respecting the sovereignty and territorial integrity of all nations. He also said that India stands for the freedom of navigation and overflight, unimpeded lawful commerce, peaceful settlement of maritime disputes, and adherence to international law, particularly the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Seas 1982. He said, adding that a peaceful Indo-Pacific with ASEAN as its center becomes vital more than ever for the security and the prosperity of the world. The Defence Minister's comments came on a day when a 3-day apex-level regional strategic dialogue of the Indian Navy, the Indo-Pacific Regional Dialogue 2022, began in New Delhi. The Indo-Pacific Regional Dialogue is an annual international conference that seeks to foster exchange of ideas and promote deliberations on maritime issues relevant to the Indo-Pacific, which for India stretches over a vast, predominantly maritime expanse from the eastern shore of Africa to the western shore of the Americas. Ambassador Anil Trigunyat, why is it important for the Raksha Mantri to reaffirm India's position on the Indo-Pacific region at this stage? Why is this reiteration so crucial?
You see, the problem is that Indo-Pacific region has emerged as a major theater of superpower competition. And we know that the Sino-US contestation, whether it is geopolitical or geoeconomic or geostrategic, is veering into the Indo-Pacific domain, in which Indian Ocean, we are a resident power, we are the major power, and the Pacific Ocean, which, as you know, that Prime Minister Abe of Japan, former Prime Minister, had mentioned that about the confluence of the two seas, and since then this has really taken off. Now, the Indo-Pacific is, of course, critical because of the various choke points as well as the various trading routes, which are extremely critical for the well-being of India and the other littoral states in the region, apart from its natural wealth and whatever there. Then we have seen also that increasing hegemonistic approaches of China in the Indo-Pacific, especially whether it is the violation of or non-adherence to the International Court of Justice Act decision against China for Philippines, or for that matter, displaying its force and breaching the sovereignty of various countries, including Japan, Taiwan, and other ASEAN countries, or the problem that we are having with China on the border. So I think that China, in this sense, becomes a singular force which has been trying to change the dynamic of the region. And India, being a major power, has to work together so that the international order and the free and open Indo-Pacific, as well as the freedom of navigation, continues to be there. Now, there is a difference between India's approach and that of the other major powers. India's approach has been, as was enshrined by Prime Minister Modi when he spoke in 2017 in Singapore at the Shangri-La Dialogue. He had very clearly said that it is inclusive, means it is not for containment of China or for that matter against China in that sense. But he urged it. And then later on, we have seen that even the Maritime Conference, which was held last year under our presidency, in that also Prime Minister Modi very clearly articulated and conferred that freedom of navigation, respect for the rights, respect of international conventions like the UNCLOS are extremely important issues if there has been a peaceful Indo-Pacific. Now, we are seeing the threats to that peace, and therefore it is important and imperative that we have the meetings of these defense ministers from the ASEAN in Cambodia, where Raksha Mantri Rajnath Singh ji is attending. He obviously stated India's position very clearly, and that there has to be centrality of ASEAN, whatever happens in the Indo-Pacific, and that India stands by this rule-based maritime order.
Now, ASEAN is, of course, one of India's most major strategic, economic, geostrategic partners, certainly. But this whole region has also come under increasing, as you correctly said, destabilizing kinds of actions from our immediate neighbor, China. And that being the case, it is also a very important part of why we are part of the quadrilateral of four democracies, which flank this Indo-Pacific region, as it were, Australia, the United States, Japan, and India. Now, even at the Quad summit in May this year, the heads of state had to say that they wanted investment in this infrastructure, in this Indo-Pacific region, and all of this ties in with the Prime Minister's Sagar approach, which is security and growth for all in the region. Since Mr. Xi Jinping has taken over for the third time, has entered his third term, there seems to be a little more aggressive intent in what China says, making this perhaps a little more important for other countries to try and articulate their stance. Would that be a correct understanding?
Yeah, you are quite right. But as you know that in the Quad, as we talk about it, the Quad has really begun to take shape only very recently. It was supposed to be a security dialogue, but it just last 3-4 years that we have seen that action has been taken, and there have been physical meetings and the virtual meetings, and the spirit of Quad along with the action plan, etc., have been issued, and which clearly focus on a couple of things. The security dimension of it, I would say, is on the other side, where we have these Malabar exercises among all the four countries. But the intent that has been displayed coming from the United States is obviously clearly targeted at China. India's, in a different way, is to take China on board so that it follows to the extent possible, to impress upon the Chinese through dialogue mechanisms rather than taking the confrontational route. So that's the difference between them. And that's the reason that they realized that disruption of the global and value supply chains, in which China was the major driving force for the rest of the world, it dawned upon nearly everyone that during the pandemic, by willfully or otherwise, there can be a disruption in value supply chains, which was further accentuated by the Russia-Ukraine war. So India, in that sense, could be an alternate for this. So whether it is the critical technologies, whether it is the rare earths, or whether it is the vaccine manufacturing or other pandemic or healthcare related dimensions, I think that that's where there is a much greater possibility of India emerging as a very reliable and trusted partner for the West, being a largest democracy in the world. So that is very true. And now, what is China's game essentially, in my view, is very simple. They know that India is the only country in the region and outside which has the potential to really confront them if needed in any which way, even though they are going to be a big superpower and all that. But India has stood, and we have seen that in the post-Galwan incident until now. That while we prefer dialogue and diplomacy and have continued on gone, but at the same time we are prepared for the worst case scenario as well. So this is something. Secondly, India is the today fastest growing major economy. Now that is something, whereas China's economic system is somewhat dwindling in a way, or is going under stress due to various factors. Now that is one. Secondly, India today may be $3 some trillion economy, but by 2047 it aims to be a $30 trillion economy and a developed country. Whereas China's aim remains to 2014 to become a superpower. Now, so at the end of the day, you see that India, the fifth largest power, the China, the second largest economic power, are in some sort of a direct contestation as well. Now, that obviously remains there, and I believe always that we will continue to have this competition cooperation policy with China because nobody wants the war. But if the war is enforced upon you, you obviously have to respond to it. But in the meantime, this kind of geo-economic competition between India and China will continue. And of course, in that, you might have the Quad countries, you might have other IPEF forums or some other instrumental mechanisms that will be played out in Asia or in Indo-Pacific, because the economic pivot of the world is moving towards Asia and is moved towards Asia already. So we are going to see that kind of competition.
Well, that absolutely what you're saying. I accept all of the things that you're saying, particularly. But, the fact is that China does claim the South China Sea area, which is a major thoroughfare for all of the sea lanes of maritime traffic to be passing through and world's trade corridors. Now, if they claim that that is its exclusive kind of zone and they want to be hegemonic about it, what exactly India cannot really do very much on its own without being a part of all of these kinds of multilateral forums, because I think that is a much better way to impress upon not just China but any other country that is seeking to hegemonize its policies and other places. Wouldn't you say that the Quad is amongst the most effective mechanisms in the Indo-Pacific region at this point?
Well, yes, it is. But as I said, that at the moment, I don't see India looking at it as an instrument of some kind of a coercion or a disciplinary kind of an instrument. It is rather looking at it more as an organization that can provide India the economic heft, because economy is also part of the integral part of the security mechanisms overall. So, of course, we have to work with like-minded countries, and that is why India is organizing or joining various plurilateral arrangements which can bring about the rule-based trade system. And we hope that China would realize its limitations and that these hegemonistic tendencies may be confronted by India or many other countries, including USA or others, in grouping format, so that the global commons and the global goods continue to be supplied to the world where it belongs, because after all, the seas and the oceans, we have our own cutout areas, economic zones or the other zones, but at the same time it is important that there are, whatever the global goods are, they continue to be made available to all the littoral states.
Again, the issue of infrastructure also arises at this point. So it's almost direct takeoff on China's Belt and Road Initiative, whereby the Quad countries, for example, say that we reaffirmed our shared commitment to deepen cooperation on infrastructure, which is critical to driving productivity and prosperity in the Indo-Pacific region. This is what was said in the joint statement in May when the summit happened. So again, the point is, I think the other countries in the region with which India is cooperating are looking at a more holistic approach for this area, whereas China is trying to be a more exclusivist kind of power in this area. Is that again a correct assessment?
Yes, you are absolutely right. In fact, we have seen what the ASEAN is doing, what happened at the APEC, and what happened before that at the G20. And India becomes the chair this year of the G20, as well as the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. In my view, that geoeconomic competition it happens among various powers. That's okay. Geopolitical competition is also a given among the powers. That's the nature of the power. But at the same time, what is extremely important is that this kind of malignant growth of hegemonistic tendencies will be extremely challenging if you are looking for a rule-based order, whether it is in the trading, maritime lanes, or the intercourse, the interaction between the states to that extent.
So basically, this region has increasingly become the hub of global economic commerce and, continuity, moving away, as it were, from the Western, the Pacific, and not the Pacific so much as the Atlantic areas. So clearly now the world's focus, including the United States setting up its own Indo-Pacific policy earlier this year. So the focus now, as you very rightly pointed out, is on this region. The Indo-Pacific is crucial. Why does this need to be reiterated so often? Because of China's behavior, or what would be the reason?
I think that using force to change the contours of borders and others is, something that needs to be challenged, and that cannot continue to remain at will of one of the powers like that. And hopefully, after the Ukraine crisis, the Russia-Ukraine war, China would have learned certain lessons. And that was evident this time when at the G20, when President Biden and President Xi Jinping met, or at the APEC summit or otherwise. So hopefully they will understand that cooperation is a better way of doing the job rather than using confrontation to achieve the same objectives.
Thank you very much indeed, Anil.
Thank you.
You were listening to a discussion on Indo-Pacific Regional Dialogue 2022, India's commitment for free, open and inclusive Indo-Pacific region. The participants were Anil Kumar Trigvinyat, former ambassador, and Nilova Roy Chaudhary, journalist. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio. You can listen to it on our mobile app, News on AIR. This program is also available on our YouTube channel, News on AIR Official. You may email your opinion about this program at airnsttalks@gmail.com.